you for joining me for this video presentation. We've got some new laws that affect employers in the hospitality industry that I want to make sure people get a basic understanding of before all of the panic sets in about a new mandate on employers. So what we have is the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act and the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. So let's start with the first one, the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. What we have is a new requirement that's going to apply to all employers less than 500 employees. So that's significant because many of you, especially if you've been under 50 employees, have never dealt with the FMLA before, which is what this is probably the most similar to. So you don't have a lot of experience dealing with these sorts of leave issues. So just briefly, first, there's going to be a requirement of 12 weeks of leave available to employees. That 12 weeks of leave, 10 weeks of that leave there will be pay available at 2/3 the rate of the employee's regular pay. The first 2 weeks of the leave are unpaid. So those unpaid weeks we'll talk about in a minute because there's also a new paid leave requirement. But the important thing to keep in mind for this portion of it, this 12 weeks of leave, is that although it applies right now to everyone under 500 employees, the Department of Labor has the opportunity to issue an exemption for those employees less than 50 employees. So the law allows the Department of Labor to step in and say, if it threatens the existence of your business and you're under 50 employees, we may relieve you of these obligations. So that's out there still. So take a deep breath. Let's see what happens with that Department of Labor piece of it. The other thing to keep in mind is this 12-week portion applies to employees for only really one purpose, and this is for them to provide leave for their children while the schools and daycares are shut down. So that's what this 12-week leave is supposed to be applied towards. It's narrowly directed at that particular issue. So the way it's supposed to work as it's imposed is once it kicks in, so it's supposed to go into effect by April 2nd. So we're going to have a few days where the Department of Labor starts to explain to us exactly what they mean by this, and we get some more information. The key thing for hospitality industry employers to keep in mind is your workforces already have shrunk considerably, probably this week, because you've probably laid a lot of people off. Because you've laid those people off, my initial read of this law is this new federal law is not going to be the program that they're going to be taking advantage of. Those employees who you've laid off, in my view, should be taking advantage of the changes in Minnesota unemployment law. So we'll talk about those at the end, but just keep that in mind. This is going to be more applicable to you once things start to ramp up again, hopefully at a time a few weeks down the road when the governor allows Minnesota restaurant and industry businesses to go back to work. So right now, what the law says is you're going to have this new requirement of 2/3 pay and 12 weeks of leave that kicks in probably at April 2nd. It says effective no later than April 2nd, so we'll have to work through these next few days. But right now, keep in mind, you should be looking at, if you haven't already, reducing your workforce and moving those people into the unemployment system because there's been changes to make that advantageous. So in addition to this 12 weeks of leave, first 2 weeks unpaid, next 10 weeks paid at 2/3 with a cap of $200 a day. There's also a sick leave requirement imposed on employers. And again, that sick leave requirement is that they would have 10 days of pay for those full-time workers working during the for that 2-week period. So that would be 10 days of paid sick leave. Now, this paid sick leave portion is essentially what would pay for the first 2 weeks of unpaid leave in the 12-week period that I just described. The applicability of the paid sick leave proportion that this applies to is broader, bigger than the 12-week system we just discussed. It covers when an employee is subject to a quarantine or isolation order, if the employee has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine, if they're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 and seeking a medical diagnosis, if the employee is caring for an individual who is subject to one of those first two things I mentioned, or if they're caring for their son or daughter, if the school or place of care for their son or daughter has been closed or the child care is unavailable, or the employee is experiencing other substantially similar condition. All right, this for part-time employees, when you're calculating this, how much leave you would get them, you would give them the average amount during that they would typically make during that 2-week period, and it looks like that would be probably looking back over the previous 6 months, how much they previously worked during that 2-week period. Especially in the hospitality industry, that's going to be a tricky calculation because there's so much variation in a lot of short-term employees. So that is another, you have the 12 weeks, which is similar to FMLA, first two unpaid. On top of that, you have these 10 days of paid leave that'll be available to employees. So that's the kind of mixture of the new thing that people are working with, especially for those employers who haven't had paid leave before and employees who aren't used to paid leave. These are going to be some very challenging issues for folks to work through. So let's take a step back. We've got to wait today, make sure we see what the Department of Labor does. Will they exempt people, employers under 50? There's also a provision that says, so typically when you're on an FMLA leave, you're entitled to your job when you come back. There's also a provision in the law that says employers under 25 may not have that same requirement. All of these are especially difficult in a time where you have layoffs, leaves, and an overall general shrinking of your business and workforce. So let's think of them together. And I think the key piece we need to talk about is the unemployment benefit changes in Minnesota. Because I really think, by and large, for employers in the hospitality industry, what they are doing this week, and if they haven't done it already, they'll probably want to do it now, is really move to layoffs of their employees, bringing that workforce size down and allowing those employees to go seek unemployment benefits. So there's been some significant changes to the unemployment benefit laws. The first of which is the 7-day sort of waiting period that is typically in place. That's been removed. So that unpaid waiting week is suspended. So when you send your workers home, or if you already have and they're asking about it, get them to apply for unemployment right away. That 7-week period is gone. They're going to get payments out as quickly as they can. The other big change from how the normal unemployment system works is that unemployment recipients do not need to actively seek suitable employment that puts their health or safety at risk or that of others. Workers that have been laid off temporarily may meet this requirement by staying in contact with their employer. So as an employer, you should keep in mind that employees are going to be reaching out to you, and you should be clear, yes, we're still shut down, we still don't have hours available. That will help them understand that they should be in that unemployment benefit system. And here's a huge thing for employers, and this is why it's so important for you to really be transitioning over your workforce out of your employment into a layoff, because the unemployment benefits paid as a result of COVID-19 will not be used in computing the future benefits at your future employment tax rate of a tax-paying employer. So I'm sure lots of you in this time of very difficult financial time are worried about that. The way the Minnesota unemployment law has been reworked, it should relieve you of that concern. And also for you business owners, the 5-week benefit limitation is waived for business owners. So keep that in mind. So overall, what you need to keep in mind, there's going to be this new requirement on employers of under 500 employees. An exception may be made for employers with less than 50 employees. We have to wait and see about that. The next few weeks are going to be a time of lots of employees hearing things in the news about what their benefits are or may be, and it's going to be a time where employers in the hospitality industry need to be careful about how they respond to their inquiries, try to gather the information. So I think your response for today, as we wait for that new information, is largely you will have done layoffs to move your workforce to the unemployment system. You'll be keeping track of these new developments. But my view is going forward, these sorts of paid sick leave and family leave apply to people who are actively working in the workforce. And if your workforce is mostly transitioned out of that, at this immediate point, there should be less effect on you. The important thing will be, as business starts to return to normal, as it starts to pick up, carefully consider these new requirements as you're rehiring and restaffing your workforces, because it's a new obligation you're not used to, and you'll have to carefully consider it as you carefully bring your workforce back up to scale. I hope I've been able to answer some of your questions today on these new provisions. More information will be provided. We'll continue to update you as we get additional information from both the federal and state governments. Thank you for your time.